And yeah, I wish I've been there. Makerere in Uganda is almost, for me, is a second home. That's where I started the research. It's my first African country to be there. So a lot of attachments. And thank you, Mr. Herman Munge. Thank you very much for agreeing for being the discussant. I also would like to thank everyone who contributed for this seminar and for all of you who gave us the time today to join with us. Thank you. So I'll be sharing the screen now. Well, thank you again. So I'm going to give a talk about African communities, archaeology, and field pedagogy. Let me share a little bit about the personal background. Like I said, this research, I wish I could be there in person to deliver it. It has both academic or intellectual attachment as well as personal. And the question will be asked in this presentation, and when I say personal, as an African practicing archaeology, those research interests and questions developed because of the personal experience as well as the training I received. So this research is a bigger part of research when I was doing my dissertation research. So part of what I'm going to give you a little bit of background on that research before we go into the paper. So we know that archaeology is a colonial enterprise, or it's a product of colonialism. And part of my research interests focus on decolonization and transforming archaeology. So just briefly, we talk about decolonization. It means that sharing power in the colonialism, and afterwards, power is invested in specific nations and practitioners, and marginalizing communities, local communities, indigenous communities, people of non-Western countries. So, and even within the Western countries, but in this case, in the context of African context. So that focus on the decolonization and the post-colonial experience, how the discipline should be practiced. So the problem when we look at decolonizing archaeology or transforming archaeology is there has been very little research. This research started, at least formulated in 2008, and the actual field work started in 2010. And at the time, this is the research problem that was identified, and it still is relevant. I know I shared the publications that were published several years back, but most of what is presented there is still relevant for African universities and countries. So when we talk about decolonization in archaeology, what aspect actually we need to look at? What are the problems? In this research, what I look at is, first of all, we need to look at the institutions of archaeology, how archaeology was institutionalized in the colonial period, and how those institutions are working in the post-colonial period. The second is, what's the role of education in the process of decolonization? So education as a methodology in the process of decolonizing archaeology. And what should be the relationship between local communities and archaeologists? The last one is, what should be the role of African scholars? If education has a role in the process of decolonization, those who are trained, African scholars who are trained to be archaeologists, what should be their role in the process of decolonization and transformation, the discipline? So overall, the questions that I asked during this research, the larger part of the research is, again, what's the role of African archaeologists in decolonizing and transforming archaeology? And is there a change in the practice and pedagogy of archaeology? I specifically look East Africa. I am from Eritrea, so I have experience in the Horn of Africa, but East Africa was more better situated for the research topic or research interest. So again, the research themes that emerge out of that research is institutionalization of archaeology in non-academic settings and emergence of African archaeologists. This time frame is 1920s to mid-1980s, and in the development of archaeology at Makerere University and the University of Dar es Salaam, as well as pedagogies and practice of field archaeology, and then exploring the relationship between local communities and archaeology. So the research here is that it mostly presents 1960s to the early 2000s, like 2012, up to 2015. But still, again, they are relevant as they presented, as they are still useful for most African universities. So in the larger research, we look at the national museums and department antiquities to explore the institutionalization of archaeology, universities, both Makerere University and University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and then to explore the relationship with local communities in field pedagogy or field archaeology practice. And Old White Gorge, or now it's the proper way of calling it, Old White Gorge in northern Tanzania. Generally, in the research methods, I used archival research, interviews, and participant observation. When I say participant observation, I attended the field schools, the classroom in archaeology. We went to local communities and observed how they interact with archaeologists. In the interviews, interviewed archaeologists, students, and other archaeologists as well in non-academic institutions, as well as archival research in those research areas, the universities and the Department of Antiquities and museums. So now we'll come back to the research findings in archaeology and heritage institutions and Africans. I'm sorry, I'm not going to go directly to the questions of looking at the development of archaeology at the University of Dar es Salaam and the field school and the community relationship, because I think the colonial period establishment of archaeology background is very important for us to understand, to get into those themes. So archaeological research in Tanzania starts in the 1920s. To mid-1960s, what we see is the colonization effect, the German first and then British, but mostly dominated by specific individuals, in this case, the Louis Leakey and Mary Leakey. So what we see in that period is Africans were contributed invisible. It wasn't visible as what is now in the post-colonial period. They were mostly as porters and excavators. So their contribution was invisible, and that's part of the colonization. When we look at in terms of colonization, collections were, meaning material culture collected from the archaeological research, were exported to Kenya or British. So it's another aspect of colony, their place of origin. We see here legislation related to cultural heritage started in 1937. After independence, it amended in 1964. When we look at archaeology in the museum, this is now the National Museum of Tanzania. Archaeological collections start much later because it was exported again in the 1950s. Training Africans in archaeology within the museum started in 1972. Now, the collections and exhibition mostly focused on human origins. And this has implications in terms of how you relate with African communities. We'll see that later. Another institution to look at in the colonial period is the Department of Antiquities in Tanzania. It opened in 1956, and archaeological research within that department focused mostly the Iron Age, more of a recent instead of the human origin. Training Africans in archaeology started in 1966, much earlier. And major archaeological research in the 1960s was done by the British Institute, the Leakeys, and as well as a few independent archaeologists from the United States. In terms of leadership in the post-mainland Tanzania, and when I say Tanzania, the Tanzania mainland and Zanzibar, so their research mostly focused in mainland Tanzania. The Department of Antiquities leadership-wise started mostly in the become Tanzanians in the 1969. The National Museum became administrated at a higher level in 1972. So even in the post-colonial period, still continued to be dominated by foreigners. Now we see Tanzanians in archaeology. So again, as I said, in the 1920s to 1950s or late 1950s, they're invisible. The opportunities granted later in the 1960s mostly that's because of when African countries get independence, what happens is automatically Africans have to be involved in the administration process. So whether they were trained in archaeology or not, or archaeology related fields, they have to fill in the posts. So that's the time we see the opportunity being arising in all institutions. Then I just mentioned that it started in the 1970s mostly in terms of the institutional power gaining by Africans, in this case by Tanzanians in the post-1970s. I call it in a way a pseudo-institutional power, because that institutional power is mostly engaged in providing research permits. But even those research permits are not that much problematized as in how important are going to be for national development and community development. And partly this has to do with the way archaeology was accepted in the post-colonial period when these countries get independence, whether it's Tanzania or Uganda or Eritrea. Why is this discipline important for our countries? So what happened is, Africans might look in the post-colonial here in the institutional power, they have power, they're giving research permits, but deep down, if you look at layers of it, it's not really problematized to suit the nation's needs or the community's needs or the students' needs or the practitioners, the local practitioners themselves in terms of their needs. So what we see is from invisible in the 1920s, we see Tanzania having by 2015 around 13 archaeologists with a PhD and 12 PhD candidates, about more than 32 master's holders, and 600 or more BA graduates. Now that number has already increased. We need to do a more recent research. But how? How did they get this far? And we know that, for example, in Makerere, it's there where it started very much early. And I think that's why I picked this presentation. Is very important as well for the development of archaeology at Makerere. To share this would be, I think, great, whether it's for Makerere or other starting countries. So when we look at research findings from the University of Dar es Salaam, what we see is that archaeology, after it developed in the non-academic at the Museum and Department of Antiquities, archaeology introduced as a course in the 1960s. And this has to do because of the process of Africanization, because of the need of rewriting African history, because of the challenge those non-academic institutions were experiencing. But it was taught only for 2 years. And when it was introduced, it was part of the East African University. So again, it started first at Makerere before even coming to the Dar es Salaam College at that time. That's what it was called. And so it was introduced only as a course. The struggle to establish archaeology started more in the 1970s. But it did not go successfully until 1985. So the permission by the university was given later in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and the program, they started developing the curriculum, and then the program started in 1985. What enabled to start the program? In short, is because of a visionary leadership and harmonized interest in developing archaeology in the country, a visionary leadership of the archaeologists, the local, and the foreigners who were involved, and then the harmonized interest in developing archaeology, because it was a challenge, a struggle in a sense, because they have to get permission from the chancellor, from the college. They have to get all the needed requirement for establishing as well collaboration from outside institutions within the country, as well as even funding, sourcing funding. So it was more of a collaborative effort. And we see in the mid-1980s, in 1995, we see the BA degree in archaeology opened. And then by 2000s, a lot of programs opened. Obviously, as the number of students increased, they have to have the MA program, the PhD program in archaeology, and MA and BA diploma certificate in heritage management. And so we see after the 90s, archaeology growing more organic. Organic in a sense because of it was developed based on the local needs. They were pushed. It's just like the way right now Makerere is. Makerere has been producing students, I think, almost like 7, 8 years now. I mean, from the graduation started. So now what are we going to do with the graduates? So it develops itself naturally. And here is, I wish you could have seen it, but it is within the articles we shared, the number of students increasing from, let me just put it in slide, so for me just to see it. From 1985, if you can see the cursor, I don't know, but from 1985 all the way to start picking up in the 2001, and all the way to 2012. So the number of graduates increased, and MA graduates in archaeology from 2002 to 2012 also, we have about 50 students coming with an MA degree in archaeology. Now, just to give you the chronology of the development of archaeology again, 1985, the BA in archaeology, 1996, MA in archaeology by thesis, 2003 by coursework, 2005, PhD program just by research or thesis, 2009, BA in archaeology heritage management, 2013, MA in heritage management, and in 2005, the certificate and diploma. The certificate and diploma, again, they developed because the archaeology they were graduate were not as relevant or as what the institutions, non-academic institutions desired. So they have to frame another program in heritage management and certificate programs. And also, of course, the tourism development and interest in heritage as well pushed to that path. Now, this is just a little bit background on the development of archaeology at the University of Dar es Salaam. We will be heading now to field schools about, and this is the article we shared in collaboration with my supervisors at that time. So the argument here is that close examination of archaeological field schools, in addition to exploring the institutionalization of archaeology, we need to closely examine archaeological field schools, how they operate in African countries, in this case, in Tanzania. And those outcomes, those examinations are very important in the decolonization and transformation process. So field school, the program started in 1985, the very first field school, formal field school. Remember, in 1996, archaeology was already introduced as a course, so students were going informally, joining their professors, or at least one professor. But formal field school started in 1986 with only 3 students. Later, when we see in the 2000s, the number of students highly increased, and the field locations as well dispersed. So what was the aim? Now, what was the aim? Two questions here. What was the aim for introducing archaeology at the University of Dar es Salaam? And what's the aim of the field school courses or training, the field aspect? Archaeology was introduced at the University of Dar es Salaam to train Tanzanians to become researchers, conservators, and curators. Again, it's because the non-academic institutions, the antiquities, and the museum got challenged to require highly skilled professionals to do the research and to as well also to manage or to administer the research interest agenda in the country. So at that time, what they need was researchers, conservators, and curators. It's with that in mind the program established. One of the problem in that is it basically got inherited as it is from the colonial period, in a sense. And this is not unique for Tanzania. I have experience in the other 2 countries, in Uganda and Eritrea as well. Because of the knowledge we don't have, we as pioneer scholars or among the first ones, because we come into the field without experience, when you easily jump into that administration, you don't have the skills needed to problematize the discipline itself. Those skills come out of the training, but most importantly, out of the experience and the challenge. So it wasn't about what is archaeology for Tanzania, or what's archaeology for the nation or the community. It's more, oh, we don't have the staff, we don't have the personnel, so we need to have the program here so we can understand the program better. And then why the field school? Why the field school is because it was aiming to produce responsive and independent African scholars. And this, at that time, when it was introduced, it was more interested in historical writing histories or rewriting histories, so more in historical problems, making Africanizing the history, the narration of African experience, and also addressing national needs. So the national needs, as I just explained, is the need for personnel for administration purpose. 2 practical courses were introduced, and those ones are the one that looks at practical field school course in field training and survey and excavation. Now, from 1985 or 1986, the first field school, all the way to 2015 or 2014, when you look at the syllabi of those courses, and this is within the article we shared, it's very important to explore both as well as the university's guidelines or objectives for providing practical field trainings. So for over 25 years, the objectives of the practical field training remained unchanged. It focused on survey and excavation. Basically, it remained within the traditional archaeology or mainstream archaeology. It was provided for 8 weeks But in reality, it could be 4 to 7 weeks, depending where it's done. It also served as a research outlet for local scholars, because local scholars don't have direct access to funding. So it has many purposes, not just for training. But originally it started as student-centered. It focused on the students to come up as more independent scholars. So it provided a venue for students to collaborate with their professors, to publish, and to write reports and all that. But with time, as the number of students increased, the situation of funding changed, the nature of the field school as well changed. Now, when we look at the universities, guidelines in terms of the objective for practical fieldwork is they want to have practical field courses relevant to students, as well as has contribution to national development and relevance with local communities. So practically, even that objective itself, when you look at the university's prospect, it did not change for years, for over 25 years as well. But I did not find any problem with it as an overarching, as an umbrella principle. It requires relevance for students, something applicable knowledge. It requires relevance for national development and community development. More focus on national development, but it does mention community. But I think the problem is more of within the course themselves. The courses, and it doesn't mean they did not have relevance for national, because they were focusing on history part, but in terms of the actual solving real life problems, archaeology wasn't problematized, or at least it didn't get that level. Okay. Now, what major change that took place for the archaeology field school is funding. And we know this is for establishing archaeology department in African universities. One of the hindrances is, how do we get funding? Archaeology is very expensive. Well, most universities, whether it's in Africa or anywhere, they actually don't have all the field, the laboratories and other things required for archaeology, but they have basic ones. So even the basic ones, though, it's a legitimate question. And I'll talk a little bit about funding, because for the University of Dar es Salaam, it was part of it, it was able to establish archaeologists because of availability of funding. And this was to international donors, mostly from the United States and Norway. And and as well as at that time in the 1980s, tuitions and student expense were covered by the Tanzanian government. But in the late 1980s, the situation funding started changing just a few years after field school. That's because of the country's economy. So the government started requiring come with cost-sharing approach, where students have to pay a certain cost. It didn't affect archaeology. There has that financial funding higher education system. It has 3 phases, the early 90s and all the way to the mid 2000s. So where archaeology got affected was in 2004, 2005. And at that time, the funding from foreign donors will start depleting, and then students, those who are eligible, actually have to borrow from the higher education students loan board for their practical. And this is for all field practical at the university. And then those who can't, they have to come up from out of pocket. So what happened was there were several costs. The university, the field allowance for the instructors, the field cost, the special field requirements for students, and the field practical training and research fees for students. So the university continued to pay instructors field allowance, but the field cost, it completely erased. So the professors wouldn't have access for transportation or field supplies. This special faculty requirement for students, the field gears and field practical training and research fees all falls by getting the loan or the out-of-pocket funding. So that's a major change, and it affected several changes. Change in the transportation, for example, in the Western context, when field with the Western funding, okay, number of students are also at that time few, so they can use four-wheel vehicle, but now it's more of adapting to the local transportation mode, take buses, walk, and the food, where they stay, students, and here the food is more local and they stay within the communities. So it allows students to interact in social cultural activities of the local communities, such as in religious and like sports and things like that. So what we see in the field school is the increased number of students, lack of sufficient equipment, and absence of field instructors. Over the years, as field of instructors, even though the number of archaeologists increased, because those archaeologists are also have several other responsibilities, sometimes they cannot stay 8 weeks in the field school. So they have to have students who are very well versed with the field to teach their own peers. And then another thing was in the beginning when the program started, the field and the laboratory analysis, they were still working in the same area, on the same research, but now students, they don't have connection where they collect artifacts, but they don't get a chance to analyze it. And then again, like I mentioned, publication was one of the way to create independent and responsive scholars. In the training, that one also interrupted because of funding. So overall, when we see interaction with local communities in the field school, we see an improved relationship between local communities and students and practitioners. So community and collaborative approaches are not part of the formal training. So participating community archaeology was not part of the field school. Interaction occurs in very informal settings, like I said, in religious activities, in recreation activities. And there's one that's called Public Archaeology Day, where research funding is shared with the public, basically the communities that are within the vicinity of the archaeological activities takes place. So in the post-colonial archaeological practice and pedagogies are expected, the relationships and attitudes, to be embracive and engaging and give voice to communities' knowledge and perspectives. Those are what we expect, but they're still waiting for formal incorporation into the field training. So that is the field pedagogy part of it. We can talk about the experience of Dar es Salaam. And I don't know how we are doing time-wise. And if we have enough time, we will go for the experience as an example for local communities, their perceptions, reactions, and demands on archaeological practices. So when we look at the relationship between local communities and archaeologists, about 10 years ago, there were very few articles that explored those topics. Now we have plenty of publications coming out of African countries. But what we see is still, whether it's in a well-known research area such as Oldupai Gorge, or whether it's in a very new research area, the experience are the same. So in 2010, 2012, we did several research explorations to see the community's experience within Uganda and Tanzania in collaboration. Actually, the one Ugandan was with Herman, and then in Tanzania it's with Nasserian and Kokeli. Here we have this Kokeli in Uganda. That's where we met doing excavation, and Nasserian, the one who is on the yellow shirt, with one of our the mothers from Olduvai Gorge, who invited us into their market. I think this was a market where they sell the beads. But to come back now, the main argument in our chapter in this release, the main argument in the relationship between local communities and archaeologists is there need to be more research that recognize local communities' experience, these perceptions, reactions, and demands on archaeological practices. So this is part of problematizing archaeology, what relevance it has for the immediate communities where we do research. And then if we really want to have a community-based archaeology in African countries, it's very important for archaeologists first to interact with the communities, listen to the communities, their perspectives, their experience, their demands, and then we can collaborate to design context-dependent community-based archaeology approaches. So we see now, like I said, there are many publications coming out, and they come either within the local experience, or they are coming because of a foreign influence. But whatever it is, it requires, there's no a single way of a community-based archaeology or heritage. It requires a more internal or knowledge. This is context dependent. So in terms of the Olduvai Gorge, what we did is that we asked several questions for the local communities, just to find whether the colonial legacy changed in the contemporary practice of field archaeology, and particularly look at forms of relationships that archaeologists have had with local communities. In this case, the Maasai community were one of the earlier indigenous group or the earlier local communities in the area. And we examine the community's perception, relations, and demands on archaeological and paleontological as well. So Olduvai Gorge is well known for paleontological and archaeological sites. Olduvai Gorge is famous for its hominin and other fossils. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, started in 1979, and has on-site museum. Here we have on the left and the right at the top is a research camps where researchers come and stay. And then at the bottom is the map of the Olduvai Gorge. So some of the pictures, they don't have the source where it's coming from. I think the Microsoft I'm using, the computer just took it out. I still haven't formulated my computer well yet, so it doesn't show. Now, there's a basic difference. One is that the Olduvai Gorge has a challenge of water. So the local community get their water from the left. You see where there's a little well they share with the wild animals. The researchers come every summer or whenever they have funding. They have their own water tanks and all that. So you have two, three different worlds within one space. And that's the difference. See. And then this is an overview of the old Olduvai Site Museum. It got updated in 2017 with a better, wider space. Here is a close-up of the museum. It has exhibitions from Olduvai and the Laetoli footprints. And At the bottom, you see students. There were students when we participated in field schools in 2011. They visited the museum. So students in field schools, the first thing they do is they go to the place where the camps, the researchers stay, and then they visit the museum. They go ahead directly to the archaeological, paleontological research objectives. There is no formal interaction with local communities. Like we said, it's very informal. Here is the Old Pine Museum gift shop, and this gift shop is partly, it's not part of the museum in the sense that it's owned by the museum employees. They get the souvenirs from the local community, but the local community don't have access directly to it. So you can see disparity between for whom is the museum situated there. Again, this will be proved by the number of employees and number of visitors. We see tourists, for example, between 2007 and 2011, majority of the tourists you see on the left with the 6 digits are foreigners, very few Tanzanians. On the right, in the middle column, and the total is on the right side. And in terms of employees, there were in 2011, 2012, mostly 6 permanent staffs and 5 casual laborers. And so the Maasai community were only 4 within the casual laborers. By 2017, when we went back to do community engaged anthropology project, the leader, or the conservator, was a Maasai from the surrounding area, not directly from Olduvai Gorge, but a Maasai, yes. Now, in this specifically, we had different research methods. We had in-depth interviews and focus group discussions. We had questionnaires, observations, again, by 2017, the community engagement project. So what questions did we ask for the communities? We asked them, have you seen people who look for stones and bones in the gorge? Because that's what they call them, people who look for stones and bones. And does the community have local names for those activities? In this case, archaeological, paleoanthropological research. And could you share with us what the community thinks of those activities? So what does the community call this archaeological, paleontological activities? No local word used for these activities, but they say they call them stickers. I put them in the Maasai, Ilat rock, and following words. I don't want to butcher those words, but those who dig up for stones and bones, and those who are learning about Earth, some of them. So the community identifies the researchers as a group, not the activities. So whoever is coming by the group, whoever is like research camps, that's how they identify them. Not the activity, they don't focus. They look at the researchers as a community themselves. And what they think is they obviously know, and this is applicable anywhere, it's not for nothing. There's something precious, and take it far away and sell it. So that's the understanding they have so far. And imagine, research at Olduvai Gorge took place for over 100 years. And still, until recently, the community's perception is this. So when we ask them, are these activities good to the Maasai community? Well, the community, they give us a very comprehensive evaluation, not just for their own interests, but for including for regional, national, and global level. So they see researchers as neighbors and evaluate in relation to other neighbors. For example, what employment are we getting? Are we part of the knowledge production? What social service, whether education, medical, water, how are they supporting us? And also, is there any direct involvement? Let me see, I think it jumped. Yeah, so in the right to the scientific knowledge and full participation, do we have equal employment opportunities and payment? But they require, there has to be a mutual respect and cooperation and equal representation and a peaceful plus neighborhood as as well as a working environment. So they are looking for collaboration. And this also goes with students, African students themselves in the field schools. And even when they come first as archaeology students, they're very excited to be part of the profession. So there's that level of wanting to be part of the profession. They want to incorporate their views and voices and to accommodate their needs. And I can share this personally as an archaeologist. When I was trained in archaeology, most of the time I spent daydreaming about how this profession is going to be relevant. What can I do to make this better? But because the pedagogy doesn't allow that form of participation, all those desires and visions continue until we become, let's say we get a PhD, and depending when we get that PhD, given other challenges we encounter, so these visions remain unimplemented for several years and more than decades. So they want to have access to higher education in archaeological research. They have children who are already finishing high school and they would like to study those, but the researchers need to provide access to scholarship and access to the education. They would like to have engagement programs that allow community to know what is exactly going on in their own research areas. So again, they want access to education, maybe support in healthcare and water. They want direct involvement in the museum. They want the museum to have relevance for the community. Of course, relevance as well as also sharing income, and they want to have museum awareness activities. Local people want to know what it means to store bones and stones, whether these artifacts have a value, including economic, because the focus right now is engaging tourists. And as we have seen, the tourists are mostly foreigners. So neighbors, they want researchers and even the Department of Antiquities. So here the transformation is a more collaborative effort that includes the local institutions, the national institutions and international institutions, and local and international scholars. So they want the neighbors, all those, to be educated about and respect towards the Maasai local view norms and views. And then they want it possible to establish a cultural museum or a section within the museum for the local community. In 2017, we have observed that the museum was expanded and they have a section for the community to be having their own exhibitions. I don't know yet how that one is going on, but there was several changes in the museum. So they want an approach. This is an example of community-based archaeology. The community wants a neighborhood reciprocity approach. Neighborhood in the sense that you live close to each other, you have to have a right to be a reciprocal relationship. So what we see is there are colonial legacies. In conclusion, and archaeology need to be closely examined in African universities, in African institutions, and not just by moving and establishing and biggering the department or increasing the number of students, but beyond giving training opportunities to Africans, it has to be problematized in these institutions, as well as it has to create relevance. It has to be accessible and engaging to African students and African communities. I would like to acknowledge during the research we did this for funding and research permit and the institutional supports. And I thank you everyone, and we can move to the next part. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
And now we can move directly to the comments and discussion from my colleague Herman Wonge. Please, if you're able to unmute. Yeah, there you are. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I thank you, Asmeret, for your presentation and your interest in post-colonial archaeologies and the colonization of archaeology. This is a school of thought that deserves more attention that it has been accorded to. And of course, we know that archaeology was, the history of archaeological thought was started way back in Europe. And the way it was introduced to Africa, it came in form of a colonial package. And that's why things have gone that way and have continued to be that way. And I think that explains why many colonial officials could collect artifacts and art pieces from wherever they were and had to take them to Europe, and they are now in museums all over the cities in Europe. And of course, we know now with the activists for repatriation are trying to ensure that some of these artifacts come back, but that shows you the level at which archaeology came into Africa. Your project not only addresses community concerns in the way we practice archaeology, but also the way we teach archaeology in our universities. And for some of our audience who might not know your
Hello?
Seems we've lost the connection for a second. Let's.
I think so, yeah. Is there a way we can tell him so he can't keep talking?
I'm sending them a message.
Yeah,
On
thank you.
WhatsApp. Sorry about.
I hope I didn't take a lot of time.
Sorry, Herman. We just lost the connection for a second, and I think you're muted.
Yes, yeah, that happened even when Asmeret was talking, so we missed a few slides. I think your slide 15 and 16. Yeah, but that's okay. So I was still saying that, yeah, Asmeret is one of the people that has given us constructive feedback when we are reviewing our curriculum. So she's been part of us, and I really, really thank you for your input. It is one of the complex schools of thought that you're trying to handle simply because it has some challenges that it is coming with. Your presentation has been quite, broad, touching the pedagogical bit and then the community involvement. So I'll try to really focus on some of the key things that you talked about.
Okay.
Yes, when you're establishing research problems, you considered issues to do with institutions of archaeology, the education, of course, local communities and archaeologists, and then African scholars. And of course, you've highlighted, or you've taken us into the history of how archaeology was introduced at the University of Dar es Salaam. And I'm glad to report that I did my MA from the University of Dar es Salaam. And thanks to their strong
Oh, we've lost them entirely. So, let me just message William and see if they can connect on another network.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry for the interruption, everyone.
Oh no, it's part of the challenge for a post-colonial movement. So the technologies, we're just experiencing the reality.
Hello, Herman, welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, our internet, the signal is really poor, so we're going to be having some interruptions, but fingers crossed. Yeah, I was saying that, yeah, when you made a comparison between Makerere and Tanzania, and of course we know that the Tanzania program was able to take off because of the support from the government, and the Makerere one fizzled out immediately, almost at the commencement, and you did not try to comprehend the reasons behind that. But the political situation in Uganda at that time could be part of the reason as to why things didn't work out. We underwent through political turmoil. And of course, another reason could be the issue of archaeological visibility. When you look at the discoveries that had been made in Tanzania and Kenya, and remember that at that time, the major theme in archaeology all over the world was towards human evolution, and anybody who could find fossils and stone tools, that was the attention. That is where the attention went. So that could possibly be one of the reasons, but of course, we know that after that, we've had some years of stability, and that is possibly why we've been able from the 2013 to take off with our undergraduate program. He said that in the University of Dar es Salaam, archaeology was introduced as a demand-led program. And I think that has been elsewhere in almost all African universities. The grounds on which programs are introduced is because after reading the job market, what does it demand? And people go into that. And I think it is on such ground that the University of Dar es Salaam introduced the Bachelor of Heritage Studies. And of course, when it comes to the people that you try to put into your study so much that the students, the university staff, but I think little attention was paid to the politicians. I mean, politicians sometimes can be a problem, or they have their own issues, but in many cases, they're the movers and shakers. And I think because of the good political will, that's the University of Dar es Salaam had some good funding from their government. That's why the program was able to take off. But this, I think, is something that we need to pay some attention to, because, yeah, we might think that everything that you want to achieve, I think it should be a sort of triangulation that you need everyone on board. You say that the collections in the initial stages of archaeological practice in Africa were all exported, and it was indeed dominated by foreigners. Yeah, like I say, that since archaeology, the archaeological school of thought began in Europe, I think probably you had no way of avoiding that, because they were the professionals at that time. And considering the resources and the infrastructure that was on ground, it would explain why everything had to be carried, especially where you needed to deal with fossils and spend a good amount of time in a laboratory. And this is still happening up to now. I mean, we don't have a lot of established infrastructures in Africa where you can do the analysis, especially on the fauna material. When it comes to dating, you have to send the datable samples far away to either Europe or America, or some other universities out there have done. I did mine in India at Anna University. So you can see the level at which it is. And again, as you propose the decolonization, because even at universities right now, where professors have secured some grants, these grants come with some interests of the providers. If the theme or their interest of research is about the origin of modern human behavior in Africa, so even your research topic has to fall into that. And I think that has remained as a problem. When it comes to your community engagement, you based your research at Olduvai Gorge, and I think that was a perfect choice because the site has a history of about 3 million years ago, and indeed it has made tremendous contribution towards our understanding of human evolution. It is one of the sites that has received a great number of researchers or scientists in archaeology, paleontology, wildlife conservation, and other forms of natural sciences, and actually some humanities, because there are people who have studied the Maasais and their social establishment, their way of life. It is. And if there is any community from Africa that has seen it all from research as it is, the Maasais, I think your choice was perfect, and all the knowledge that you gathered and their interactions or their expectations could really count. When you look at community-based archaeology or public archaeology, it is now under a new umbrella known as citizen science. And citizen science involves considering the local citizens in knowledge generation. And the local citizens can participate as contributors to the new knowledge. They can act as collaborators and sometimes even as leaders. So that is what citizen science calls for. And it has some principles. And one of the principles is that the research should be beneficial to both the professionals and the citizens. Citizens can participate at any stage of the research. So they can participate at the initial stage of the research design. They can participate during data connection, during data analysis, presentation of results, etc., etc. Citizen scientists also receive feedback, and that is very important, and you've done that. It also emphasizes legal framework and ethical issues, and citizens are acknowledged when results are being presented. But it also has some challenges, like you could be aware, of course, the time frame, and that is where I want to put some emphasis. For example, people who are at student level, their involvement with the community might not be achievable, even if they so wish. And I would like you to give us some comments on what would be your suggestion on that. It is also episodic, especially in people's way of life. So whereas Olduvai Gorge has been researched, and you have researchers coming there for almost each and every year for at least a field research season. But elsewhere, where you don't have archaeologists paying attention or researchers going, the only way citizens will be involved is when there are some researchers. If a project ends after 2 years, that will be the only training that the citizens that were involved in the project will have acquired, and it will end there. And if that's the case, then apart from the payment, all the motivation that was given to that person, they won't have achieved much because they won't take it on. Then another issue that can come up with is the scaling or identifying of the people from the local community to work with, the citizens you want to work with. My experience in Turkana, where I've participated in international field school, is that the principal of the project would go and talk to the local chiefs. Those are the highest at the local level, hierarchy or level of administration in Kenya. Then the local chief would take the principal and introduce them to the elders. And when you agree that you need some local people to come and participate and be part of the project, it is the elders that will select who to come and work with you, because they have manyatas. So manyatas are homesteads in, among the pastoral communities. And so one homestead has many people, and they will ensure that they evenly do the distribution of who is to work with you. So that puts everyone on board. But you'll have a challenge where you go and try to select a few people and then others feel left out. That will be an issue by itself there and then. Another thing which I also want to put back to you, Asmeret, is that there are also gender issues when it comes to identifying the citizens to work with in the community. When you look at your interview questions, you said that one of the questions you're asking that was, have you seen some people who have come here to collect stones and bones? And of course, people who usually move around are the men or the boys when they are grazing their animals among the Maasai. So it was so easy. It is so easy for them to be walking and come across the gorge and see people working, and not the women who stay at home. So in a way that you research, that question could have been the way it was designed. It looks like it was catering for only one group, because women, when they're at home, they might not know exactly what was happening. So you couldn't get an answer of yes or no from such. So similarly, when you engage the community elders or the leadership, they will be able to evenly get for you people that you need to work with. And having made those, then I have just a few questions for you. Whereas community-based archaeology is really good, but usually you have commonly held view or the African or the community's perception about particular concepts. Yet the science, bit of it says something contrary to what they understand or to their conceived ideas. So how would you go about that? When you were collecting data or when you were working with among the Maasais, you went with Peter Coquel, who is a Maasai, a Syrian, and then the third person, sorry, I've forgotten the name. But I'm wondering if the other two were also Maasais, but I know Coquel is a Maasai. Yes. And so how were the people's just the feeling that one of their own had come with you and was at that level of, doctor? So that also helps us to know, because our experience still is that whenever we got there, in their devolution administrative system, the Kenyans have employed or have established regional museums, and they employ people from those very localities. So going to Turkana, of course, you will be led by someone from the museum who is a Turkana, and there it becomes so easy. Because I've seen that one of the comments the locals you interviewed were commenting about is that they bring people to work as to be part of the project, but from like the Mbulus, from who are not part of the local citizenry of the old Vai Gorge, and that was a big concern to them. There are times when we have fights, and it is being recorded that at some point, I think it was 2002, and then way back in 2009 and 10, there were two groups of researchers that were dominating research at the Old Vai Gorge, that is ORAP and then TOP. And of course, even the University of Dar es Salaam lecturers, since some of them were in different groups, they made some camps and they were like having issues, and we were fighting so that each of them is dominating the research. And it was reported all over the dailies that they are fighting over site. So how does such conflicts impact on the local community? Just in case you happen to have some, interaction and how people responded, that would also. I guess I can stop there at the moment. Other people come in, then I can come in later. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful. And so, yes, I am sorry, first of all, that I know I mentioned Uganda and Eritrea, just, to create relevance for the presentation for us as audience. But I really did not present the experience of archaeology or the development of archaeology in Uganda and Makerere, even though I did my research at Makerere as well in the Ugandan non-academic institutions. I did not do that intentionally because I and Dr. Elizabeth Chazike, we already presented that last year at Makerere. So I thought given the University of Dar es Salaam experience would more add to that rather than repeating that presentation. But I definitely agree with you that there are several factors that made archaeology in Uganda and at Makerere did not develop as desired. Of course, the political situation is the biggest concern in the struggle, as afterwards the funding and the lack of local professionals. But we will do that another time if there is any interest. But I focused mostly in Tanzania, so sorry if I confused the audience as well. I mentioned as well the focus was mostly human origins. Again, when we look at, you're right, for the experience of Tanzania, the focus was mostly human origins, and that's why it heavily dominated, and that's why we see Old Vai Gorge as one of the research hubs and well-developed research center because of the human origin, and the funding was directed towards that. But again, briefly, when you look at the experience of Uganda, that was not the case. Actually, after the 1950s, Uganda mostly geared towards the recent past, the historical archaeology, and that's quite different. So the way archaeologists interact with local communities, even if an intentional interaction, the research question, the research project really affects the whole relationship. So in human origins, they don't really need to interact with local communities unless they want somebody to help them in the physical labor needed. And even in that case, they will bring in Kenyans, someone who they are comfortable with. But in the recent past, when you're working in the historical archaeology, ethnoarchaeology, by default, archaeologists are going to interact with local communities because that's where the information is. And so that strength, there is already an existing relationship. And when you look at community-based archaeology and heritage in the curricula, in focusing on historical archaeology, community archaeology, ethnoarchaeology, historical archaeology, and ethnoarchaeology heavily support the themes that are needed to achieve community archaeology and heritage. So the research question, the research agenda really determines whichever country. And again, this is context dependent. We can compare if we want, but we were focusing mostly now in Uganda, in Tanzania. But you are right, definitely in Uganda, because archaeology is getting to be developed where, political conversations, as we have seen last presentation, are very, very, intense. Even in Tanzania is now, but because the archaeology program did not need money from there, it wasn't much. And still, it is required. We need to look at the state in archaeology, the influence of the state in archaeology. Okay, we preach for community-based archaeology and heritage, but obviously, what's the role of the state? Would African states will be also ready for this? Even if African scholars, students, and local communities are ready, even international institutions are ready, the state is very important. So yes, I take your comment very well. We talk about collections in the 1950s, in the pre-independence period, taken away. Yes, you are right. In certain context, we definitely still need to move around collections because of the lack of the facilities needed within a country. However, if we can come back and compare briefly the experience of Tanzania and Uganda. You see, in Uganda, Wayland, the pioneer archaeologist, and afterwards, like O'Brien, they really, the Uganda Geological Society and the Uganda Museum maintained the collections. It was not transferred. And afterwards, the coming of Marek Pusnowski as well developed a more engaged program because it focused on the historical and the local history. So the experience of Uganda is actually quite different. I think this has to do, and what's interesting was in Tanzania, it was not only exported to the main the core of where the colonialism takes place in British, but it was exported to Kenya. The National Museum of Kenya was now National Museum of Kenya because that's where Lewis Leakey is from. That's where he's familiar with, and that's where he has his center. So it's very close to cross the border, and also as a researcher, he's going to do what's convenient at that time. But it did not help the country to enrich its collections and in terms of the training and all that. So, so it's very context dependent. But like you said, based on your experience as well, working in the human origins, at times you're forced to export. Are they coming back? That's another question. So in the colonial period, they were not. And that situated a colonial practice. And obviously with time, even the ones we export them because of lack of facilities within the country we practice, I think if it's looked closely, if the professions are problematized, if we consider about citizen science, there is going to be a way to do it a much local. It will come itself, it will grow naturally. But identifying the problems that are causing dependency is very important in the process of decolonization and transformation. Yes, grant heavily does affect. Thank you for the comments, for the community engagement. And definitely comment says citizen science. I believe someone presented as well in decolonizing in knowledge. I think what's his last name, Moose something at this seminar, I think talking about citizen science as well. Yes, it's about science and citizens, definitely. It's we're talking about archaeological science and its role in the society. So I like that comment as well. Another challenge you pointed out is the time frame that for students, it might not be achievable correct, right? Are you here with me, Herman? Hello?
Yes,
Yeah,
I was
so
saying
it
that
might not achievable, and
you imagine
in
that,
terms.
yeah, you imagine that at a student's level, for example, at master's level, you have like just a couple of months to do everything, and your engagement with the community you might not really be able to achieve what you would have wanted, simply because unless you're after your master's you're going to go back and continue with the PhD in the same place, same site, etc. But I mean, if you have to just do research, it will be a very short period of time when you might not be able to engage the community to the level that you want. Thank you.
Yes, I see what you mean. And you're right. If we use the existing framework, it is not going to be achievable. You know why? Most of the research projects are going on. The research teams are continuing the research, archaeological research interests that already started in the pre-independence period. Iron Age, human origins, and all that. The topics by themselves as a team are not a problem, but we have to get out of those boxes actually. So the aim right now is it serves both. It want to be a research project as well as a training platform. But if we focus specifically on training, and if we allow, for example, I did my master's research or you did your master's research because we're affiliated with professors and because they are the one who are getting the funding. So our research interest was directed with the funding and the research interest of our advisors. But if we had the resource and if we were given to experiment with topics we want, we might come up with something that more engaging community. But yes, you are right. So in this case, it might even need a whole change in terms of considering that universities, well, we need trainings that actually allow our students to be creative, to explore their identities and how they relate to this profession. We're talking about, this is about a source of identity. This is about heritage. This is about history. We just can't continue repeating a colonial research themes and continuously talking for 100 years about just the same stone tools or just about the same ceramics. We have to contextualize them. There's nothing wrong focusing on those material cultures. But there are so many other research problems that we can focus. And I know you guys have started doing something. I remember we talked, is it about the landfills? I can't remember correctly, but there are other given, it requires really visionary leadership. And obviously as local scholars, we have several other challenges that prevents us from focusing closely at the local level. But local visionary leadership in a sense that even in terms of collecting and bringing funding, sourcing funding from within the country, involving communities, addressing current problems that can be addressed using archaeological principles, or even investigating local way of creating understanding the past. So it's going to require a shift and a lot of thinking and a lot of hard work in terms of to engage our students from the very beginning. I think also if we involve students as a very, very active participants, we're going to learn a lot from students. We cannot just take students as someone who's going to learn. They come with a lot of knowledge, so we have to open those doors as well. I think that's the suggestion I can give at this level, because again, it's very dependent on a context, and it's much easier to work to know that I'm working in this community or in this country, and this is the archaeological experience. This is how can be transformed, or it can be reformulated. You mentioned a challenge to work with local communities as well. Yes, it requires time again. At Old Bike Coach, I remember in Uganda, you and I, we did first meet with the LCs and start talking with the communities. At the Old Bike Coach, because it's very diverse and the area was very wide and the administration was in all about. But because of I went already to do participate in field schools, I already met the local members of the local communities, and I already shared my objectives and that I'm coming back, we are coming back. So we didn't have a challenge in terms of picking who is who. It's, again, it's very hard. You need that ethnographic knowledge of the local. Sometimes the local knowledge can be very deceived, but this anthropological approach is very helpful. The more you stay, the more you know the community, the better you know who can be engaged, who can't, because sometimes locals also can control that. So when you look at in decolonization and transformation, don't just let's not just think in terms of European colonization. We also have to look inequalities at the local level and how we can interact. So at the same time, we have to also respect local values. We have to find a way to get into the community, to be accepted in the community. We can't just be, we are the game changers. No, we are always learners. We would like the communities to be the main drivers. So in this case, we followed their guidelines, and we worked actually with both men, women, young, elders, and all that, but slowly. A specific group we come in and slowly get in. Eventually, we stayed with them, and so yes, it is hard, but it takes time. It's a matter of time. In terms of the questions we asked them, have you seen stones and bones? That one comes from a preliminary research. We did not impose it directly. Have you seen stones and bones? No, we did in the very previous in the field school interaction. We learned some of them already informed us, both men and women. So we already worked with it before we start sharing it with the rest. And I know it can be a very leading question. Partly it is, but that's because we knew that that's how they identify it, and that's why we applied it. But you're right, we have to be very careful not to put words in their mouths and direct the research with our own perceptions. And then, did we work with the specific groups? Again, our first interaction is depending, like you said, who is coming to the field. It could be men, it could be children. But one thing I have seen is children, and this is another discussion, they are very, very important. They're just great journalists, and they share everything they see in the field. All the field schools I've participated, about 3 or 4 of them, we had a lot of children come and visit to us, and this is very popular for every archaeological research. And but before we get to the community, already they got what we did, who we are, and all that, because of the children communicate with their communities. And as well, the elders or the young men who are coming to interact. So let me see. So I think we had, it wasn't just, a specific group. Eventually, our first our questionnaire was 50-50 in terms of the participants. So I haven't shared here, but it was 50-50. I think we have about 59 or 60. So we have both men and women. The research assistants, they were both Naserian and Kokeli. They're both Maasai, and it was intentionally done to fulfill the gender equality and to make sure that we have someone female from the community, or at least a Maasai, to interact with the community. And so we already, from the get-go, we considered to be a diverse groups. But when you start somewhere. And obviously it started with both men and women who came to the research camps. That's where we first settled. The last question you asked was, how do people feel having their own, in this case, a Maasai or two researchers coming to their community? They were thrilled, very happy. I mean, not just the Maasai, even just seeing another African. But I think the most important part was the recognition. The fact that someone is recognizing that they are part of the community. They are, main owners and inhabitants of the landscape. So we would like to be interacting with, and that approach itself was just very highly accepted. And yes, there is a difference between me as an African and between a Naserian and Kokel. There definitely, and the language barrier itself and all that, yeah, they felt more comfortable and they're happy, and that's why they also want, they shared, even us, we want our children to learn this, to be trained in here. So it's very, very important. They support as well as they want to be part of it. The last thing you mentioned is about the fighting among researchers. There are very local communities, in this case, the Occupy residents, the Maasai residents, they are very, very, very aware of the politics of archaeological and paleoanthropological research. They study the situation just the way we study their experience and expectations. And they're not happy with it. Sometimes, you know, I mean, I wish I could share some of the quotes. They're like, wow, where's the essence of being educated then if you fight this much and, you know, or if you behave this much, you drink and you bring all the women and all this. So yeah, they're very critical in that scientist behaviors as well. And so, and as scientists, you know, or as researchers, we have to first make ourselves presentable before even we think about solving or interacting with local communities. And because of that experience, because of that observation, and that's why they are calling for a neighborhood, peaceful approach. The peace itself, it comes from that experience of conflict among researchers. They want a blessing, they want peace. They don't want their landscape to be part of this conflict. They want researchers to be as role models for peace, negotiation, collaboration, and proper representation. So thank you.
Thank you. That's really some important, fascinating questions and responses. I think in the interest of time, we'll collect a few questions. I see two already here. I don't know if Professor Adesina, if you would like to ask your question. To unmute and ask your question. I don't. Or have we lost him? Sorry, we've lost Professor Adesina, but he asked in the chat. He said, "Thank you for your presentation, Asmeret. It was illuminating. One question I would like to ask is what local ethos and customary provisions and priorities frame the understanding of archaeological excavations and the values attached to archaeological finds by the locals." So partly, so I think extending about what is the product, you know, if I can add to this, because this was going to be part of my question.
Yes, it needs a little bit clarification.
Is inherently kind of an extractive process. It's taking things out of the ground, it's digging into the ground. And, you know, thinking back to, there's one way of thinking about, you know, that colonial archaeologists and I would say, you know, even as you said, paleoanthropologists depend on people in, you know, local communities, at least to know where to go, at least to know the landscape. And so colonial archaeology has always been dependent on local knowledge, even if it has never acknowledged it or incorporated it into its intellectual vocabulary and discourse. So I wonder, you know, thinking about that question as well. And then our colleague Christopher Mohosi has a question. Christopher, I don't know if you're there and able to, yeah.
Yeah, I am. Okay, thank you so much, Asmeret and the steers of the program. Now, my question is on the category which is central in your presentation, community. And so you keep referring the community, local community. And in your last submission, in response to Harmony's question, you tried to open it up. And I must admit and apologize that I came late into the conversation, so I could have missed this, you could have talked about it. But so nevertheless, so you tried to open up the category and talked about men, women, young and old. So looking at age, gender, I don't know whether literacy is also involved. And at one time, you also talked about you gestured to the inequalities in the community, trying to invite us to pay attention to the community. And so taking that cue, I was like, would you like to go ahead and open up that category? Because the community is not that kind of well-bounded, homogeneous entity. It's diverse. And I remember you also mentioned something to do with the diversity in the community when you talked about different ethnic groups that constitute what you called the community that you interacted with, especially in Tanzania. But beyond that, I was curious who is actually, who in that what you call the community is interested in archaeology, in case I missed that, and why are they interested in archaeology? And then you are using words like participation, engagement, involvement, which do not actually mean the same thing. Having, for instance, the Maasai with you in a meeting does not necessarily mean engagement, does not necessarily mean participation. So like going beyond that, but also paying attention to the meanings of the words that we are using, and paying attention to the different categories within what you call the community. Like, can you open it up? I hope I've not confused you with my question. I hope my question is clear. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Your question is very clear, and thank you so much for asking, and it's great to see you. Yes, you are right. And it's just not to archaeology, but for any discipline interested in community approach, the word community needs to be problematized, and it's a very difficult term to work with. So for those who work in community-based projects, they have to start at least identifying what it means and which group it is. Again, it is a context dependent to identify that. Sometimes it's bounded by geographical location, sometimes it's bounded by specific identity and heritage, and the geographical location, it may or it may not be applicable. But in this situation, it is by geographical location. So I mentioned during the presentation that people who live in the surrounding area of where archaeological and paleontological research takes place. So then within that, there are different groups who live within that area. So the local community is diverse, yes. In the case of Olduvai Goshter, the Maasai community, just currently, not in the past, but the Maasai community, Ngorongoro Conservation Authority employees, there's the antiquities employees, now it's part of the Ngorongoro Conservation Authority, and then the researchers. So we have about 4 or 5 communities, if you want to define the communities who are shared, who have a shared ideas and experience, who identify themselves as a group. But still within a specific geographical proximity. So within that group, there are different ways to look at. We can look at the experience of the researchers, or the antiquity department, or the Ngorongoro conservation area, or there's another one also, the wildlife as well, or the Maasai community. And even the Maasai community, there are those who come from the larger area of the Ngorongoro area, and they are, related, whether through blood kinship or marriage, within the ones who are more of having, if not permanent, but more permanent sort of settlement in the area. So we look at more the ones who are more, the settlement, they have settlement that they come and go back to another part of the Ngorongoro conservation area, but they are more situated within the Olduvai Gorge. And those communities, some of them are those families, some of them were actually there when the Likis started the project, and they knew the Likis very well. So yes, it needs to be prioritized, and we did not really fully, we started with that we are very open to open our minds to see even how the Maasai communities, they identify themselves as residents and as owners of the land. But with time, we like to continue learning about how that concept of community works at the local level. So there's a specific concept. It's within very localized and contextualized concept. It needs to be worked at very closely and carefully. Yeah, and you mentioned about who are the ones interested in. Yeah, so it's the same one. The ones who are the live inhabitants of the area, residents of the area. The ones who have interaction with the archaeologists and paleoanthropologists, the ones who have interaction with the museum and the antiquities, who are part of the day-to-day life interaction, that they closely observe the archaeological and paleontological activities. Yeah, we use different terminologies: participation, engagement, involvement. They're all different. You're right. And when we talk about community-based archaeology and heritage, there is no specific working approach. Some of them, they can just be, they're just involved and maybe in the field, or they are fully participated from the conception of the research project throughout the publication, or it's just can be just like the public archaeology day. So most African scholars, they think, oh, in the beginning they think, oh, this is the public archaeology day. Well, it's different. And it depends who is doing it and what is the agenda for it. So yeah, in here, for the sake of simplicity, we use all those different words interchangeably, but they are very different. In terms of engagement in ours, I would say we did engagement because we fulfilled, and I'm going to share the link here if it's possible now. We fulfilled what the community required us to do in the beginning. They had expectations from us as researchers when we were conducting this research. So what we did is when we went back, we let them get together and decide who they want to work with us, or as a representative. They have their local representatives. And we basically went the whole chapter I shared with you guys. We translated and shared our research result. We went ahead, created posters, both in in Swahili and in Ma, or in English. Yeah, this in Swahili and in English, and then we presented in Ma. What got exactly is archaeology and paleontology. Why are they collecting this? The questions they had, basically. And then we went ahead as well, requested funding from Wondergrund Foundation for Anthropological Research, because that's where the funding for Engaged Anthropology project came in, to address temporarily some of the things they want, if not financially, at least to problematize the challenge they go through in the lack of water, education, and health issue like malaria is very thing. So we were focused on water. When we were there in 2017 for engagement projects, we went over our research. We had a community get together. Everybody was invited. We had a food festivity, and we sat and we talked about the situation. It was during summer, there's lack of water. So we negotiated with the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. They contributed about certain liters, 22,000 and maybe 30,000 liters of water from the Wondergrund money, about 55,000 liters of water. We brought water tank and shared with the community during summer where there was no access to water. And then they wanted to have a nursery or a preschool, but they couldn't build the buildings they needed for the school. So we also, based on the request they bought with the money, we brought tarps, plastic tarps for covering during rainy season and things like that. I don't know how it went back because with the COVID, we didn't go back, but we tried, and I'm not supporting that. External funding needs to come to, problems should be completely solved by foreigners or outside international donors and things like that. But archaeologists, as part of the community-based archaeology and heritage project, archaeologists and paleoanthropologists need to be involved in the pressing problems and issues and needs of African communities, if not to provide those, but at least to create venues and platforms for different stakeholders to come back and to get together and address this problem. So if for example, the Ngorongoro were happy to provide the water. They were happy to give us the water tank, the truck to transport the water. So there are different forms of engagement. There are different forms of involvement and participation. But this has to do with one, identifying which one they are approaching. There is a conflict between public archaeology and community archaeology. The way public archaeology is understood in UK and the US is completely different and the same in the African countries. But the way it's understood in African countries, public archaeology is not going to work for community-based archaeology and heritage, at least in my understanding, because it just in that is very limited. You just go share the research finding and that's it. But no, this is completely a different framework. Christopher, thank you so much. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mehari, and audience, especially Herman, for those great questions. Really, it's been a very insightful discussion. I realize we're past 5 o'clock, so I think unfortunately we have to bring the session to a close. But this is for myself, who's not an archaeologist, has been very helpful, and thinking about questions of how to think about community and engagement and responsibility, and what knowledge looks like out of that interaction. Whether it's possible to think about decolonized knowledge through those kind of interactions is really helpful. So I would just like to thank our speaker, Dr. Mehari, for this presentation, and Herman Mwange for the questions as discussant, and thank everyone for your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taylor. Thank you. I really appreciate, and I'm sorry that we didn't get a chance to answer Professor Adise Sina's question, but I'll ask you for his email, and I'll just email back, have communication with him.
Great.
Okay. And I also shared the blog for the Engaged Anthropology Project, and I can send you an email for the one. So
Fantastic.
Thank you very much. This was really a wonderful experience. Thank you again.
Thank you. We can also share that link on our WhatsApp group, so everyone can get it. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. And just we'll have our next seminar in 2 weeks with our own Professor Dr. Pamela Kanakwa on the 20th of July. And then internally for our department, our PhD students will be defending their proposals in 1 week. So that's for members of the department. So thank you again, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.